Hello, everyone. It's Graham Coath with another My Music. In a minute, I'm going to be speaking to Jim Biggs. But first, we're going to watch a man and his laptop get familiar with each other.
I need to get going, mate. I'll see you later.
Well, there you go. But not in the biblical sense, of course. Jim, thanks for joining me this afternoon.
Thanks for having me.
What time is it there?
7:45 in the morning.
7:45 in the morning. I hope you've got a coffee or something there, sir.
I don't with me, but I'll have something right after this.
Yeah, right after to keep you awake. We're going to be talking about your music, of course, in a minute. But where did music start for you? When you were young, were you into music yourself? Did you have a family that were into music?
I did not have family that was into music. And when I was very young, I distinctly remember not really liking music very much because
Right.
it, as old as I am, I very early was living in the disco age. And from a very early age, I really did not like that music. But then somewhere right in my early teens, I heard a U2 song of all things. And it just drew me in it opened doors to me. From there, I started getting into post-punk stuff. I was originally grew up on the East Coast here in America and had a lot of rap and hip hop, early rap and hip hop stuff in my diet, and just became just absolutely enthralled with music. And when I went off to college, I started working at my college radio station, which gave me access to tons of music I probably otherwise wouldn't have heard. And yeah, since then it's pretty much been the only interest I have aside from maybe baseball, but
Yeah. Can you remember what U2 song it was? I mean, was this early U2? Was it the more sort of the more punk element of U2?
It was early U2. It was I Will Follow.
Yeah.
And I heard that a couple years after the fact. Not when it was fresh, but shortly after that, I discovered Live at Red Rocks and Unforgettable Fire, and those were the things that really got me started.
Yeah. What was it about it? Was it the guitar sound? Was it the fact that you were hearing lyrics that actually meant something for a change?
It was probably more the guitars than anything else that drew me in. At the time, I really embraced the sort of lyrical value that the sort of more substantive lyrics that Bono had. Subsequent to that, as I got older, I became less and less interested in lyrics and more interested in just the overall sound and things like that.
Yeah, no, absolutely. But the far cry from "Oops Upside Your Head."
Yeah.
Yeah. Is that's really what I think that's really what you were saying there. I mean, look, there's a time and a place for everything, and disco has a time and a place if you're dancing to it, right?
Oh yeah, definitely.
For me, I've always had that kind of relationship with other forms of dance music. I've actually DJ'd in my life as well in clubs, and I've got nothing against good nightclub music, if you like, or good club music. But for me, I can't sit and listen to club music, or I wouldn't want to go and see a band necessarily performing club music, because for me that belongs in an environment where you're dancing.
Yeah. Well, and I mean, just for me in the early 90s, dance was a huge part of what I was consuming as a listener. I was out at clubs all the time, just getting good times going with big beat techno, all that kind of stuff.
Yeah, absolutely. Who in the early years of you listening to music influenced you then, in terms of not just bands, but in terms of were there a group of friends? Was there Was there anybody close to you that that said, "Oh, listen to this" on a regular basis?
Not really. I was kind of on my own, where I grew up in sort of a semi-rural, semi-suburban area. And I found out later that there were plenty of people around me that were into what we used to call college rock or alternative radio back then. But at the time, it felt like I was kind of on an island.
Yeah.
The only weird influences I have where I lived close to a community swimming pool,
Right.
and all summer long they had a PA blaring music, and it kind of filled the whole neighborhood with music, and that could have been terrible, but the selections they were making were actually pretty cool for the time. Charlie Sexton and NXS and things like that. I mean, it was a little more, mainstreamy, but it was something that I heard a lot, and that probably had an influence. And then as far as local bands and things, there was really only one local band that seemed to play things like that. They were called The Other Band. They never went anywhere or anything, but they played parties and events locally and covered things like Julian Cope and U2.
Right.
And
Yeah.
so there was a little bit there. Then when I got closer to the late 80s, college time, the Ocean Blue was from close to me where I grew up. And they were like the first incidents of like me seeing somebody local and going, wow, this sounds like what I like. These guys are great. And I mean, they've of course been around a long time now, but yeah, I just had to kind of find it where I could back then.
Yeah, absolutely. I loved, I always like to read when the PR press release comes through. I always like to read the list for fans of that. And of course, the one thing that it had to for me, because they were a massive influence for me, that stood out from that was Throwing Muses. I mean, how important were Throwing Muses to you?
Actually, it's funny you mentioned that, because that was one that I wouldn't have said that it was recommended if you like Russ, but I love Throwing Muses. I was especially a fan of Tanya Donnelly and Belly and that stuff. That were something that I discovered on those Sire Records used to put out these CD samplers back in the 80s or 90s. Just Say. There was Just Say Yes, Just Say Yo.
Yeah.
And that's where I first heard Throwing Muses, and thought they were amazing. I think The Real Ramon is probably my favorite album of theirs. Not Too Soon, my favorite song, which is one of the Tanya songs. And I saw them play, oh geez, 91, 92, when Kristen was very pregnant and Tanya was very drunk, and it was
good combination.
It was actually a tremendously enjoyable show.
Yeah. Oh, I remember seeing Belly on their first outing in the UK, supported by the Cranberries of all people as well.
Wow, yeah.
What a tremendous combination to have.
Indeed.
Two fantastic singer-songwriters all in one room. But yeah, I mean, it's there's some great bands on there. The Go-Go's, Blondie, the Heartthrobs. Well, absolutely wonderful. Where down the line did you go, I want to make music? What sort of age were you?
Probably, I mean, I kind of started to want to in high school, but I didn't play anything, and I didn't fancy myself a singer, so I didn't really know how to approach it. And I hadn't really discovered the simplicity of punk rock. And then when I got to college, I kind of rededicated myself to learning how to play something. I started on bass.
Yep.
And after about a year, I was like, yeah, this isn't enough. I can't do everything I want to with this, and just started taking guitar more seriously, and initially just playing with some friends, kind of literally in a garage in some cases, and it never really went anywhere. And a couple years later, the college I went to was having a music festival. And a friend of mine there, who also worked at the radio station with me, a guy named Caleb Smith, kind of pushed me a little bit and said, you know, you got to get a band together. You got to do something for this. And I took that as sort of a challenge and whipped up a band, and we played. We were pretty terrible, but it was a good experience. It was fun. And we stayed together for, I don't know, a year and a half, maybe more, before everyone just parted ways because of moving on from school or whatever. And then a couple years after that, I moved to Seattle and just tried to get more involved in music here. And I've been, I mean, in this band for nearly 20 years, and played in a couple other bands before that and during, but you know.
Do you know, I've talked about this before with people that have come on the show, and it's something that I feel is perhaps a pressure on younger musicians coming through now, which I don't think our generation necessarily had, which is that you described it there. We got together, we were pretty awful, but we were having fun. There seems to be a lot more now of where young people won't necessarily get together in a band and make music, etc., if they just don't feel that they've got the talent, because the fun aspect of it, you know, that's not enough. It's almost like it's got to be, you know, we have got to be good, and we've got to be tight, and we've got to, you know, we've got to make this work if we're gonna do this. Whereas, you know, I was 14 when I joined a band, and it just was out of hanging around with a group of people and going, well, you know, we love music and we want to have a go at this, etc. But you know, to begin with, as you say, you suck. But that doesn't matter, right? That doesn't matter. And actually, it's almost like I feel for younger bands these days that there's probably less time to just develop.
Oh yeah.
Yeah. Whereas I feel that there was something that a group of us went through, which was that period of just being able to develop, go into studios or whatever and have those conversations where, you know, someone goes, why, you know, especially to people like drummers, why are you hitting the drums all the time? You know, why is the guitar so loud all the way through that? Yeah. Oh, hadn't thought about that. You know, make texture, tone, you know, learning like when not to play as much as when to play, all of those things. It just could come with time. But what there was there right from the start was just an initial energy. Do you feel that as well? That
Oh, definitely. And I feel like there's two things going on there. I feel like music has become such a commodity. It's such a business now. And that coupled with the internet age, when everything is recorded, everything is captured. I mean, I know if I was starting out now, I'd be terrified of somebody getting video of our horrible, horrible show and just destroying our reputation before we ever had a chance to build one. So I could definitely see why that would be it. I agree with you. I feel like there is something they're really missing out on there. Just that opportunity to stumble and fall and face plant and just have ruinous things happen that don't haunt you for the rest of your career. You know, you can just kind of recover and move on.
Yeah, you're right. The internet's played a massive part in that, I think, which is, as you say, that everything is captured. Everything's immediately out there. And then and sort of the mechanism of doing that is, you know, we used to record on tapes. In fact, before you could record on tapes, before anyone could afford like a Tascam or whatever, or even a 4-track, it would literally be a cassette recorder with, you know, and a cassette recording of a band playing just sounded awful anyway.
Oh God, yeah.
Whatever you were doing, however good the band is, you know, even when you bought cassette tapes that were made like that, bootlegs of people that were bands that you loved, it sounded awful.
Yep.
So you just went, oh yeah, actually, we don't sound much worse than that. But actually, you know, nowadays everything's absolutely spotless. So
it has to be. It has to be synced to a click track and auto-tuned, and it's almost airless. I've had that conversation a bunch of times lately about the death of rock and roll, and it's I mean, like any other music, it's never really going to die, and especially because of the internet, because it'll always keep these sort of marginalized niche genres going. But as far as a kind of a cultural monolith, it's all but dead now. Just where when we were teenagers, musicians were cool and you dressed like the rock and roll guys and all that. Now the next generation is far less obsessed with that and far more obsessed with video games and online culture, and that kind of defines the styles and trends and all that kind of stuff. So it's just a different, and I mean, it's a bummer to me because I'm a rock and roll guy, but hey, things change. I mean, I remember wondering how my kids would rebel against me because I already listened to loud, obnoxious music, and what were they going to go back and listen to Lawrence Welk? And no, instead it's just ignore music altogether and go to video games.
And how much of that coming from that, sort of background and that sort of headspace as well, how much of that transfers over into what you're doing now in terms of when you're putting together a record, going in to write a record again, and even in production of that record?
Not too much. We have occasionally, or I mean, I don't know if my band always shares these feelings, but thought like, well, the guitar is dead, rock and roll is dead, maybe we should be incorporating more electronic elements into what we do. And we have written a couple things like that have yet to be released, but it doesn't take long to drift away from that because that's really not who we are or who I am. I like having that stuff in there. I love electronic music, but that's about as far as it goes on impacting me.
Yeah, but in terms of when you start to write, etc., are you deliberately not trying to get this right, if you know what I mean? If you're deliberately happy to allow.
There's a little bit of a mix there. I mean, I love the click track era because it's so much easier to edit and cut the cool parts and keep the good parts, get rid of the bad parts and all that. But at the same time, there definitely is a conscious effort on my part to leave in the mistakes and to give it some breath and some life. And I don't really, I mean, we use some auto tune, but we don't abuse the auto tune. And if it's a little off, that's okay. And I've always been a fan and desired an element of chaos in what I do musically. I've done photography stuff for covers of previous albums where I use Holga cameras and just randomly double expose. And I just like having something that's a little out of control in all of the art I create. And that's definitely not a common thing in most new music, but it's definitely a thing in the music we make.
Well, look, you've got that element in the cover of this as well, in a way.
Because it definitely is,
right? Because for anyone that's listening to this in Technicolor, what you've got is you've got a cover where you've got a sofa, white sofa, which is pristine. You've got a nice illuminated light shining down on that. You've got a white, it's kind of a silvery white rug coming out of that. The microphone hanging down, but then you've got this black guitar kind of spoiling
yes.
La Maison Scène. Yeah.
Yep. And even the creation of the cover was a little bit of that because it was a concept I had and just drew a picture out and gave it to our drummer. Tony has a buddy, CJ Burton, whom I've never met, but he gave him the picture and kind of told him, here's what he's thinking. And then CJ put the photo together for us. So I didn't really know what we'd get back. The concept I presented him was sort of awful, but he turned it around and like, that was exactly what I didn't even know I wanted in this photo. And so it was a little bit beyond my control. And then the back cover of the album, he did on his own. He just kind of continued on with a combination of his aesthetic and ours and came up with this a second great image. So it was, yeah, even there, it's just something a little out of control.
But even the title, Washed in the Sound With, you know, for me, that just, you know, that kind of sums up that whole feeling as well, because it's a little bit like Marillion did an album a few years back called Sounds That Can't Be Made, which I loved as an album title, because
That's a great thing.
Yeah, you know, which is to do with the fact that, you know, we as people, we resonate, or we emanate sounds, if you like, or kind of a sound energy when we're in love, or when we're, you know, if we can speak to people without speaking to them.
Oh yeah,
right? Yeah,
absolutely, yeah.
and music does that. And you know, this Washed in the Sound With, you know, it's like, well, there can be kind of perfection, but we want to wash it in a, you know, it's like a wash over something as well, that enables it to be almost better because it's actually not perfect.
Yeah. Oh, definitely. And part of the whole concept is, I mean, just what you were kind of alluding to, is just letting it just run over you, just hopefully letting it kind of envelop you. And I know almost every band says, hey, you got to listen to our music loud, man. But as I've been listening to this album, just kind of checking and rechecking it, I've found that the louder I crank it in my phones, the more detail comes out, the more it really does sound better at volume. That's it. It has an opportunity to kind of overwhelm you, to surround you. It's definitely the way I would advise people listen to our album.
Yeah, I mean, as you say, it sounds corny because it's the kind of Spinal Tap type thing, isn't it? You know, Spinal Tap, Bad News, play it at 11. But there's some music isn't designed to be listened to down here and just in the background. What you're saying as well, which is really quite important, is that this is music to actually listen to.
Yeah.
As opposed to hear.
I certainly hope
again,
so, yeah.
Another conversation that I've had with several people that have passed through this door. But again, do you feel that that's an issue these days, is that people are just hearing music but not necessarily listening to it?
Oh, sure. I mean, it's become so readily available. It's, you know, there's plenty of places to stream music and all that. It's always in the background. It's licensing to TV shows. It's just omnipresent. So you kind of got to make a special effort to go out and listen to music. And it's something that takes time, and it takes your attention away from other things, which can be difficult, you know, in the way the world is now. I mean, so much going on all the time, so fast paced, so everybody's working so hard. It's hard to take out the time to do that.
You talked earlier about rock and roll, in a way, you know, not being dead, but just being different from how it used to be. You're in Seattle, right?
Yep.
Yeah. I mean, how much of the sound of what you do comes from the fact that you're in Seattle, and the history from Seattle, and just the vibe that comes out of Seattle?
I don't know. I don't know that much of it comes from the history of, but you know, you can't help but be influenced by your surroundings. I mean, the sort of gray dreariness for which we're famed all winter long can kind of inform moods. But something that gets talked about a lot less is how spectacular our spring, summer, early fall are. It's just like today, it's gorgeous, bright sun, nice breeze, and that can inform things as well. And the city itself, there's a lot of complaining around here about how much the city has changed, and it has. It's been overwhelmed by, I guess, what we commonly call tech bros, who are not very involved in music or the music scene. They're here and they have a lot of disposable income, but they're not spending on the music scene, which has kind of made the scene wither a little bit. When we started out, there was a lot more going on, a lot more camaraderie, a lot more support of local bands, and that was very inspiring at the time. That's a little bit of a struggle now. Yeah, as far as like the grunge and stuff like that, not very much. I enjoyed that stuff when it was going on, but I wasn't here. I got here in '95, just kind of at the tail end of that, so it didn't really affect me as much as it might have.
But it sounds like it's a place of juxtaposition.
Oh, definitely. And I mean, there's still a lot of artists and still a lot of musicians here and a lot of music being made. It's just harder to find
So
than
it's
it
the
used
black,
to be.
it's the black guitar on the white background again.
Yeah, very
Yeah.
much so.
Yeah.
Yeah, we're constantly spoiling their plans to turn this into a beautiful technopolis or whatever you want to call it. And
yeah,
here we are, just
where
still the
everybody
fly in the
wears a
ointment.
Facebook T-shirt.
Yeah.
Yeah, absolutely. Or you know, works for Google.
Yeah.
Absolutely. I mean, you know, God forbid, hey.
Indeed.
So tell me, for people that want to listen to this, for a start, actually, just tell people in your own words, what would you say your sound is?
Well, I mean, it's funny. This latest single is fronted by Claire Tucker, who is one of my bandmates. It's kind of the first time that we've ever put out something with the female lead vocalist. We've had a lot of women in the band over the years, but so the comparisons to Blondie and the Go-Go's and stuff may be overall a little misleading, although they're not totally devoid or missing from the other songs. We're kind of a psychedelic indie band. I grew up liking shoegaze music more than anything else, and that atmospheric stuff definitely carries into what we do. But I'm also a huge pop fan, so there's always a hook or a riff or something in our songs to try to catch your attention. And yeah, I mean, we cover a lot of bases, and on this album especially, we've tried to diversify our style a little bit to try out some new things. I mean,
You see, so the black and white goes back to spiritualized and people like that.
oh yeah, no, that I've got a Spaceman 3 tattoo. That Jason and Pete were guiding lights for me.
Yeah, absolutely. So if people want to get hold of your music and listen to it now that they're informed and they've heard a little bit of you, they want to go and find out what the music really actually tastes like. I like the idea of music tasting as opposed to just listening to it. Where's the best place for people to go?
The best place is probably Bandcamp. It's the most artist friendly, and we're at just Black Night Crash, and it's NITE, not NIGHT. blacknightcrash.bandcamp.com. You can find us all over the usual places: Apple, Spotify, all those places. We've got some videos up on YouTube, and we're always playing live shows here in Seattle in the Northwest. We're hoping to get out on tour this spring, so we'll see how that all goes. But yeah, Bandcamp is definitely the place I would direct people first.
That's cool. And the single came out yesterday, I believe.
Yes. Yep.
So that's ready to go. Go and support this band. Go and support Black Night Crash. Go and listen to it. Find out a little bit for yourself. You know, suggest to them that they should have lots of merchandise on their site because you'd want to buy it. If you are one of those people that likes to stream music and not pay for it, that's fine. You go and do that, but tell them that you'd like to buy some merchandise instead. That's always my advice. Okay, because you can support bands in other ways. Buy them a cup of coffee. Especially with the price that coffee is now. I believe it's £10 for a cup. So, you know, do that instead, or pay their heating bill for the winter, whichever one of those you want to do. But just make sure you do actually pay for your music, folks, because otherwise musicians will just stop making it. Because they are human beings after all, and as much as they love doing it for the sake of it, that they do have to survive. Jim, it's been a pleasure talking to you today. Thanks for diving in a little bit to your past in terms of music.
Definitely. Thanks for having me.
It's a pleasure, and I'm sure there's going to be a whole bunch of people as well from this interview who are going to go and check out the U2 song because they probably never heard of it as well. So
at this point, yeah, it's classic rock now. I mean,
it is actually, I think people didn't realize that U2. There were a whole load of people that didn't realize that U2 were a band before the Joshua Tree. So there we go. They're now educated. Yeah. Indeed. Thanks for joining me, and I'll speak soon. Bye for now.
Great. Thanks, Graham.